This brief lecture is on the Canadian model of client-centred enablement, so I'm going to provide a brief overview of this model that sits alongside your chapter reading for this week to help you understand this model. My name is Nerida Hyatt. I'm a lecturer in occupational therapy based in Bendigo at the La Trobe Rural Health School. So the focus of this model is on enablement. An occupational therapist aim to provide effective, client-centred, occupation-based enablement that promotes health, wellbeing and justice. This is the key focus of our work. So what does it mean? Occupations talk about enablement all the time. It's our common language that we use to describe the type of practice that we do and the style of the practice that we do. So it's a key concept underpinning occupational therapy practice, and it's our language that's shared amongst occupational therapists in our profession, and it's used to describe our approach to practice. So it's used to mean a collaborative form of practice. It's also an umbrella term that we use to encompass a range of strategies, actions and interventions, and you'll see how it's used as an umbrella term in this model. Another key concept within this model is the concept of the client. So this term has been used as a business type term. It's used to mean the person that we provide services with. So if you're thinking about a client term, you might think of it in terms of a payer and payee type relationship. So someone who's providing a service and someone who's contracting a service or receiving a service. But we use this term to describe the wide range of service users that occupational therapists practice with. So it can mean individual, and majority of the time it means individual. Currently at this stage of our professions and our profession's development, majority of occupational therapists provide services with individuals, and usually client means individual. But it can also mean family, and this is increasingly the case in paediatric practice settings. So the client can be the whole family unit, or the people who are defined as the family for that particular family. It can also mean a group. Maybe it's a service user group or a social group, cultural group. Client can also mean community, and this was the focus of my research and something that I'm developing through my research at the moment. So increasingly occupational therapists are working with clients who are communities. It could also mean an organisation, so a business or a government or non-government style organisation. And occupational therapists are known to work with workplaces as an example of an organisation. Occupational therapists also work with populations. So the population can be the client. So it might be an occupational therapist working with the whole Australian population through a government position. Or it might be a population subgroup, such as the population of Bendigo, such as working with someone like the City of Greater Bendigo, which is the Bendigo City Council. So they could be doing interventions, particularly environmental interventions, that are of benefit to that whole population. Another key concept within this model is our client-centred approach. So this model really advocates for a client-centred approach to enablement. So this term, being client-centred or philosophy, is sometimes described as a philosophy or an approach to practice. So this client-centred practice philosophy or approach was originally developed by Carl Rogers, who was actually a social worker. And the whole idea behind being client-centred means that we do with the client rather than to them or for them. So we see them as mutual partners in the therapeutic relationship. We see the client, as someone who not only receives a service but also contributes to the development of that service, and their contribution might be through their lived experience, personal expertise, it might be through their personal resources or skills that they have, or maybe things like resources in the environment that they can contribute to the achievement of their occupational goals. So this approach aligns with values, or you might call them principles, of client choice and participation, which means the client is actively involved in decision making and power is actively shared by the occupational therapist with the client. It also aligns with values of hope and confidence. So as an occupational therapist, we hold confidence in clients' potential and possibility, and we communicate that kind of optimism for their potential to them. And holding hope for the person and their possibilities is a really important part of this approach, and it's shown to be a main factor that can contribute to client change and achieving their goals. If the client feels hopeful, and if you're able to instill that hope in them, then they're more likely to achieve their goals than if you don't communicate hope or don't help them to feel hope towards their possibilities. So that's a really important part of actually achieving change with people. This client-centered approach also aligns with principles of justice and equity. And it's about working with clients who are marginalised or disadvantaged and still, making sure that they're actively involved in decision making and you're sharing power with them. So if they're people that are usually being told what to do or having things taken from them, through a client-centered approach, we're trying to enable them to gain power over their decisions and over their choices. For example, if you're working with a client who is homeless, so someone who's marginalised, disadvantaged, you'd be using enabling strategies with them to try and help them to improve their situation, to try and promote justice and equity for the person. So it's really important that we maintain a client-centered approach throughout our practice when we're using this model. So here is the visual of the model. This is again in your reading. It was first developed in 2007. It's pretty much stayed the same in the 2013 text version. They've just added some more information to the definitions that sit alongside it. So again, thinking about enablement as an umbrella term, the umbrella term encompasses all of these strategies that are listed through the middle: adapt, advocate, coach, collaborate, consult, coordinate, design or build, educate, engage, and specialise. And the idea behind this model is that we use all of those strategies or tools with the client, the person that we're working with, whether it's an individual, family, group, community, organisation, or population, in a collaborative relationship. So that's why it's got two intertwining lines that don't go in a straight, parallel fashion. So they intertwine because it's showing that we're working together with them. There's a start and a finish because it's showing that usually in occupational therapy practice there is a start and an end to the collaborative relationship that we have with our clients. But this can also come back and overlap again if we were to work with that client again, which often happens with people too. So it might be a series of intertwining lines. Whereas in one therapeutic contracted service provision, we might work with them to advocate and coach, and then maybe the next time we meet again we might work further to consult and coordinate, for example. So this is the language that you can use to demonstrate how you will use these enablement strategies with the client that you're working with. So it's really good to learn this language and understand what it means. And you will use this model, so just making sure you do really pay attention to this model and understand it, because it's something that you'll use throughout the rest of your degree and as a professional. So there are some potential limitations to this model, so we really need to understand those and make sure we're not using models blindly without thinking about where and when they're useful and where and when they might be less useful. So the concept of enablement means giving power to. So therefore, using this model, we're implying that the client is powerless or has less power in this current situation. So we're working with them to try and increase their power and increase their ability to make decisions and to be autonomous. But we also need to recognise that some societal barriers are really difficult to change. So even though we're using this model to enable what we can and to instill hope in the person, we still also need to consider the societal barriers that make it hard for that person and consider how we might get around those, or maybe if they're barriers that we really struggle to get around, we might need to think about alternative strategies. Or the other reason this might be an inaccurate way of approaching working with this person is that thinking about the person as being powerless might be a really false or inaccurate assumption. Maybe the person actually has the power to change their situation but is choosing not to for personal reasons, such as the example of the person who is able to exercise, happy to exercise, but still chooses not to on a day-to-day basis. That person's not actually powerless, they're just making a personal choice. So we shouldn't rush in trying to enable things with people where maybe they do have the power to change that situation and understand how to and have the resources to do it, but just actually don't want to. So we shouldn't apply that they need to change in any given situation and that they're powerless to do so without our help. The client might not be confident or receptive to be an active participant in therapy. So sometimes we go in there really wanting to create a collaborative relationship with the person, but for different reasons, so it might be a cultural expectation or a personal value, they actually don't want to be an active participant in their therapy and they want you to do all the work for them. Sometimes this is something that comes with different age groups. So I've noticed working with older people, they sometimes expect you to be the expert or the specialist and you'll be the one that tells them exactly what to do, and they're not used to being a collaborative partner in a therapeutic relationship. Whereas working with a younger person who's probably more, some younger people are more able to vocalise their decisions and their needs and what they want, and they're more likely to be an active participant. So we can't force people to be an active participant. We need to consider cultural expectations and values, but we do need to try and negotiate that situation and not just take it for granted that we'll just do everything for them because that's what they prefer. There are also organisational procedures and expectations that might be a barrier too. So you might have lots of ideas about how you can use this model for environmental interventions, for example, but maybe going to modify that playground for that young person isn't actually something that you can do. Maybe you don't have the money, maybe you don't have council approval, maybe your organisation says that you can't do it for whatever reason. So there might be other barriers that make it hard for you to use this model in this kind of context. So do think about those limitations when you're making this choice about using this model. But the majority of the time this model is relevant and it's something that you'll definitely use throughout your professional life. Thanks for listening. I hope this makes that long reading a little bit easier to understand, and I do hope you put the time and effort into understanding this model because it is a really important one. Thank you.